Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. Slam has pointed out that there was a spelling error. I went back and changed that. But yes, my dictation software has decided to rebel. So I'm busy going back and changing things. So I will be continuing to make changes where Dragon, naturally speaking, decided that I didn't know what I was talking about. So welcome to dictation software. I can only, I do the Yoda type thing like an armadillo, and it doesn't work real well. I am thrilled with the number of people that are already in the house, and I'm seeing a few people that I don't always get to see, but I do get to communicate with. So a shout out to Mr. Phil Fox, who of course has his own station, and Phil, towards the end there, you can throw that up there. Slam has been doing some great stuff with posting some stuff. There are one or two of the things she posted that really interested me, so I may go back and look at some of those. So we have an interesting topic tonight. We're going to continue discussing this rather large argument, and this argument is one of two arguments against the incarnation, particularly in Jewish circles. Now, the argument of impossibility is also used in Muslim circles. That's the argument that God cannot incarnate himself because essentially he can't take form, or it would be beneath his dignity to do so. And that's called the impossibility argument. Now, the other argument is called the why bother argument, and that's used more in terms of Kabbalah. The idea being that Kabbalah envisions a world that is panentheistic, or some sort of asymmetrical dualism. Those are all fancy words. Here's the thing. Kabbalah views the universe as being an extension of God in terms of the problem of evil. I mean, it's one of the interests for me. I'm always interested in the problem of evil, and Kabbalah's way of solving it is essentially one of two ways. And in terms of the issue of the incarnation, those who are Hasidic Jews, now they only call themselves Hasidic Jews, so I have to introduce you. Haredi would state that we all have divine spark. Now, not in the sense of the image of God. I don't have a problem with that. But they have the idea that God receded to make space, and there are these emanations called the Sphirot, and that we contain some divine sort of spark. So that's their sort of solution, and it's another solution. We have not moved to the issue of why bother. We're still kind of dealing with the issue of the argument from impossibility. And so we'll get going here, start looking at our PowerPoint, and ask ourselves some very important questions. We are dealing with Maimonides, who is one of the thinkers that molded modern Judaism today, which is not biblical. Maimonides comes on the scene, is very influenced by Islam and Greek philosophy, and begins to try and be the codifier of Judaism, because really Judaism has had virtually no official statement of faith. I mean, there were statements of faith tried, but they didn't catch on. And so Maimonides decides that he's going to rationally systematize Judaism. And so most Jews are operating under a Maimonidean system. And so that's why I keep going back to him, because his influence is in the background. But it's part of the cement that is used. And the question we want to look at is are there theophanies in the Bible that are worshipped? What does that do to the Bible? What does that do to Maimonides' argument if he's correct? And how does that affect the Bible? And so we're going to look at these. Guys, don't underestimate the place that theophanies play. They are the coming attractions of the incarnation. They are the coming attractions of which Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment. Now, there is a distinction between theophanies and incarnation. And we're going to touch on an important point as far as temptation tomorrow night when we look at where Jesus's greater spirit, what might have been his greatest spiritual battle occurred, and what that does to our understanding. But tonight, we're not going to go that far into it. What you do need to understand is a key difference. When we're talking about incarnation, we believe that God became flesh. And what we mean by that is that God took on a human nature. It is very hard for us to grasp. Now, theophanies are not that way. They're coming attractions, but the incarnation is a culmination of this on a level that is much higher. So when we're dealing with theophanies, we're talking about something a little different, of which the incarnation is the highest expression thereof. And so we're going to examine the Torah to see if there are any historic incidents in which theophanies are worshipped as a demonstration that God can take form. Or if theophanies are worshipped and they're not God, does that mean that God approves of idolatry when he is producing the idol? And so let's get started on this very interesting discussion here. Now, what we're going to examine, we have to look at the high view of Torah, which Maimonides had, and see whether the Torah allows for the worship of theophanies. Now, if it does, how does this affect Maimonides' third article? Now, you're going to get introduced to Maimonides' articles. These are called the 13 Articles of Faith. This was Maimonides' attempt to codify and crystallize rabbinical Judaism. And so these are a part of the Jewish prayer book, and they are recited. And even Kabbalistic Jews mix their Kabbalah in, like the Hasidic, they're mixing Kabbalah in with some Maimonides, even though there might be places they dislike him. The biggest problem that the Haredi have with Maimonides is because they believe that God is the unknowable, the Ein Sof. They don't like the idea that there's a number 13 associated with these articles. In other words, you can't number something that cannot be numbered. But that is kind of another story that needs to wait for another day. So hang out with me. Here is the infographic. Remember, we've been working on different areas of this infographic. Now, what I'm excited about is that my fellow coworker who's finishing his dissertation told me to stay at the chalkboard, that this might even be useful as a training tool. And so I'm excited. And I've started to use this technique because I really like it. If you can flowchart the argument, you can get a feel of what the possibilities are and then examine them. And if you can eliminate possibilities that are necessary for your opponent's argument, then you can essentially consider his argument non sequitur, or not following, or not working, or undermine it. Now, Lindsay's raising a point about the definition. And she's got an interesting question. And she's got an interesting kind of response to this. So I'm going to go back to that. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to give a shout out to our sister from down under, who traveled the longest to tune in. Now, I'm just kind of teasing, but you know, when you go to a meeting, they always say who traveled the longest. And so I'm glad to have her here. We've been flow charting it. This is a real useful technique, is ask questions. If this were true, what would this mean? And if what this means can't be, then you have a good reason to believe it's not true. Now, it's called a modus tollens argument. If P, then Q, not Q, then not P. All right? But sometimes just going in someone's argument and saying, you know, I have this proof is not as effective as simply saying, okay, so let's suppose your position's true. Let's just suppose it. Let me grant you your position. And what does this mean if your position's true? And then if you can knock out the 10 pegs, you can say, well, I've got good rational reason to believe your position isn't true because it takes me to a place that I cannot go. So we've been doing this with this Maimonidean impossibility argument that Muslims borrow from. Maimonides borrowed from the Muslims, and they are returning the favor. And the same thing is happening with Tovia Singer, you know. And so this is kind of a key thing. Jewish people have preconceived reasons why they can negate what you're presenting to them before they present it. So they would do, if God cannot take form, then he cannot be incarnated. God cannot take form, therefore he cannot incarnate. See, modus tollens. You can look at the same argument from a modus tollens sort of point of view. So we're on this part of the infographic. And so if we go up to this area here, does language demonstrate the actual worship of manifestations of God's presence? Those are what theophanies are. So that's all I did was stick the definition in there and expand the term a little bit. If yes, what happens if there is language in your Bible that says that theophanies are worshipped? Where does this take us? Well, then we need to ask whether the Torah records these incidents. Now, why do I say the Torah instead of the entire Hebrew scriptures? Because what we're going to see is that Maimonides singles the Torah out in a rather unique way. And so he is very fixated on the 5 books of Moses, believing that the prophets were less than Moses. Moses is the chief prophet in his mind. By the way, it's a reason that Jesus in his mind could not be greater, because Jesus cannot be greater than Moses, and the prophets are all less than Moses. So even if Jesus was a prophet, he would be less than them, or at best equal to them. So that's why I took the Torah. Okay, the Torah records these incidents falsely. Does it? If the Torah records these incidents falsely, then Maimonides' view of God's incorporeality undermines the Torah. If the Torah is lying about these incidents, then Moses' view would undermine his same view of the Torah, because he's got a very high view of the Torah. If the Torah doesn't record these incidents falsely, okay, then Maimonides' 13 article is undermined because God can take form. So yes, okay, I can say yes, and then someone can say yes, but these incidents aren't really recorded accurately. And say, okay, are these incidents recorded accurately? If I say yes, well then, oh yeah, Maimonides is correct that God cannot take on form. Okay. But what happens to his 13 articles view of the Torah? If the answer is not, and the Torah records these incidents honestly, then his 13th article, his third article is undermined. And by if yes, I don't mean yes. The Torah records these incidents falsely. What I mean is, if yes, then we need to ask another question. Is that language legitimate or illegitimate? See, just because we have a language doesn't make the language legitimate. I could use language to say that today is Friday, but that would not mean it's Friday. So there'd be actual language, but the truth claim would be wrong. So that's where we're at, and that's what we're going to examine tonight. So hang out with me. I need to introduce you to Maimonides' articles, because if you're going to understand what he thought of Torah, and if you're going to understand what he thought related to God's incorporeality, now we discussed this. There are 3 basic views. I didn't come up with all this language, so I'm borrowing a little bit from my co-friend who's finishing his doctoral thesis. He talked about the corporealist view of God, which is that God the Father has a body. If you want to know who believes that, check your Mormons. They believe that God the Father has a body. That's a corporealist view. Now, some of the early Talmudic rabbis talked about God having some sort of body, like he lays tefillin, he lays phylacteries, okay? And they were virtually corporealists, okay? Now, there's the non-corporealist view that allows for God to incarnate himself. Okay, God doesn't have a body, but he can take on a body. Okay? So it's a corporealist view. It's a non-corporealist view, but it allows for incarnation. So it's non-corporealist, but incarnationist sort of view. The third view is the view Maimonides would take, which is non-corporealist, non-incarnationalist. God can't take on a body. It doesn't allow it. And I'm not using the exact same language because, once your dissertation's copyrighted, your language is too. And so those are the views. And so we're looking at Maimonides' views. I do want to let you know, just so you know, that was just kind of to let you know. And we'll deal with those excuses maybe, because those are interesting to examine. In looking at Maimonides' articles, what does he think about the Word of God? Okay, what does he think about who God is? Well, okay, this is the inability to take on form here. Okay, no form, no unity. Okay, God is God, and there is no other. So those basically those theophanies cannot be a separate deity. Okay. And God is God, and see, he has no body, he has no form. There's no one like him in form. Maimonides taught an absolute unity. He's what we're Trinitarian monotheists. He's a Unitarian monotheist, just to help you with the terminology, okay? Whoops, sorry about that. I was on the wrong page. There we go. Now, how are theophanies treated? If theophanies are worshipped, now this is the point I'm getting. If theophanies are worshipped as God, okay, they're treated as deity, and they are not God, the Torah would seem to accept a form of idolatry, because they are manifestations or images, but they are not deity. The essence of idolatry, okay, is assigning deity to an image or form that is not deity. Okay? Or giving the honor of deity to things that are not deity. While man making images of God is wrong. Check out the golden calf incident. I mean, Israel got in serious trouble for pulling this stuff. Okay? God would seem to have no problem with him making images of himself and having men worship them. Okay? If he, as long as he's the one making the image here, it doesn't seem to be a problem if the theophanies are not God, but they're worshipped as God. Okay? And Slam's throwing up a verse I'll go back to. Of course, there is another possibility. Remember, we're looking at that chart and we're asking questions. We're interrogating the position. There is another possibility. Maybe the Torah just inaccurately reports these incidents. Maybe there is no worship of a theophany, but we think there is because these incidents are misrecorded. Now, I know that anyone who has a high view of Scripture is going to go, no way. Okay, but I'm entertaining the possibility because the best way to get rid of the possibility is to entertain it and show that it goes places that do not make sense. Okay? If these theophanies are indeed God, there's reason to believe that Maimonides' third article, which says God cannot take form, is wrong. And those are our three basic possibilities that we're looking at logically. Now, we could go irrational, but we're dealing in the realm of rationality. If someone goes irrational on you, you just, that's irrational. You can go there if you want, but you have just fried out the reality of rational thought. And if you want to engage in some sort of bizarro world where rationality doesn't exist, then try living that way for about 24 hours and get back to me. Okay? We're going to look at one of these key incidents. This incident really is key. We're talking about the Exodus. We're talking about Moses' commissioning. We're talking the Torah. This is like the second book of the Torah. Okay. This is like absolutely key. This gets talked about every Passover. This is a key passage. Now, there aren't non-key passages, but there are passages that are going to be more familiar to your Jewish friend. I mean, the burning bush is not something that even a secular Jew shouldn't have some idea about. You're dealing with a very, very unknowledgeable secular Jew, even about his own history at that point. And you say, well, let me inform you about a piece of history. And why do I know about it and you don't? Let me put that up there. There we go. Okay. I don't mind doing that. Phil's a good guy. I've been on his show. I still don't remember whether I've had Phil on my show yet. I think so. Yes, it was a while back. So let's talk about this. Now, this is a familiar passage. But have you ever thought about whether a theophany is being worshipped? Now, theophanies include the glory of God, which Jews call the Shekinah, the angel of the Lord, in his very forms, because this angel of the Lord appears and is called the captain of the Lord's hosts, which, by the way, the captain of the army is the head of the army. So if this particular being is the captain of the hosts of heaven, well, the hosts of heaven that are not fallen, the hosts of heaven have only one captain, and that's God. So that's kind of an interesting sort of addition. We know that the angel of the Lord appeared to him from the flame of fire from the midst of the bush. We know that from the text. Okay, he looked, the bush was not consumed. Now, what you need to see is this section right here. And when the Lord called, okay, when the Lord saw, he had turned aside. So if the angel of the Lord, we have Moses, see? Now the angel of the Lord appears, Moses appears, and the Lord appears. Now we're going to ask a question of this text to get rid of. And John Williams is talking about Talmud, and that's because Talmud had a very hard time dealing with the angel of the Lord. And latter Talmud has a lot of polemic against Christianity. And Jews got into naming angels during the intertestamental period and beyond. So you have Raphael, in addition to Gabriel and Michael as considered archangels. But we don't have any biblical evidence that there's an angel named Raphael, although I don't mind, because it's an incredibly neat Hebrew name, which means God heals. If you want to know what Ezra means, it's essentially helper. Okay. But that's a whole other story. And I am accused of going on rabbit trails. So at least, so we have Moses. We have the angel of the Lord. The Lord saw he had turned aside. He calls to him and identifies himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, the other underlying thing here, okay, is that Moses hid his face for he was afraid to look at God. Now, let's start dismantling the passage here, okay? And I'll tell you more about the weather in Arizona. Whoops. Well, that's just another advertisement for Mr. Phil. There you go. Double duty. Twice the fun, okay? The angel of the Lord appears in the bush. The angel of the Lord is identified as God to Moses. Now, let me go back here, because I've got the power of Logos to throw that up there, okay? And we see here the noun the Lord being used. A proper masculine singular. It's not Moses. Now, someone might try to argue that it's a different individual. We're going to kind of cover that, okay? But what you need to see is that you have Moses, which appears as a masculine single. Now, it's noted as being in the absolute. Let's go here, Moshe. Singular masculine proper noun. Proper noun is simply someone's name. You have the Lord here, and then you have the Lord identifying as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's no intervening place where it states the Lord joined or the Lord appeared separately from the angel of the Lord. We're going to talk about that, but that's where I'm getting that from. Now, someone could say it's an argument from silence. This is a significant silence. Okay, this is a significant silence. And there are places in which a significant silence ends up occurring. And so, yes, you don't want to use an argument from silence, but if the silence is deafening, it is no longer silent. And we're going to see how the grammar ends up working also. So someone might try to pull this. We'll talk about somebody, pulling this and how they pull it. Moses worships the theophany, the angel of the Lord, according to the text. So I'm considering this an incident in which this occurs. Now, remember, we look at the counters here. Think of this as a chess game, okay? I put this piece out there in the center of the board, and there's going to be a counter move. And the counter move is essentially that the angel of the Lord is there, but God comes into the frame, and the angel of the Lord is like observing this while God's there. Now, does it explicitly say it's the only two characters in the scene? Because that's what someone's going to say, is the angel, God snuck in there, the angel of the Lord's kind of watching this, and then Moses is worshiping God, okay? But it really isn't the angel of the Lord. So let's take a look at the grammar here, okay? Now, what I have here is canvas, where I'm allowed to do some things within Logos. And I like it because just like my little X-Mind chart here that curtails the argument, okay, this allows me to put verses up in the original language and do some graphic stuff with the verbs. And what I'm interested is your English translation is not going to do justice here. Okay? And this is a good place for you to know that your English translation is not going to do justice. And this is where the original languages are really kind of helpful because, see, Hebrew does not have verbs for certain things. It has forms of verbs that function in ways that we have separate verb words for. Let me give you an example. We consider the word appeared and the word saw as separate words. Hebrew doesn't do that. Okay, Hebrew doesn't do that. And so here's your verb, okay? Okay, and that's, for those Hebrew experts out there, people have fun playing with it. Okay, vi, ye, ra. Okay, that's called a doubling thing here, okay? So it's as if there were two of those, but there really aren't, and that's a little complicated. And what you're seeing is, you'll notice that these two look a lot alike, and that's because they're the same perfect basic verb. What I also want you to notice here is that they're in a very, very similar form, okay? They're in a form that's third person male singular. Now, why is that? Why are they in a form that's third person male singular? Well, because that means their subject is third person male singular. So one needs to ask what we have for third person male singulars. And what you saw in this section here, and I want you to see it, is this is the angel of the Lord. See the phrase? In Hebrew, the verb comes first. We don't do that in English. So your English translators have to change the word order. See, it says, and he appeared, the angel of the Lord. Now, that's not double speak. The he there is being explained by the nouns that come after it. So who's he? He is the angel of the Lord. And he appeared. He who? He, the angel of the Lord. So we just shorten that because it sounds funny to say, and he appeared, the angel of the Lord. So we just say the angel of the Lord appeared. But this matches this, okay? And this verb form is a lot like this, third person male singular. And what's the subject that follows the verb there? Well, it's the Lord. Now, remember, I said the Lord is clearly God. Well, how do I know that? Because of the linkage here. Now, let me warn you about something that someone might try to play around with. This Elohim is plural. This is not plural. And that's okay. That goes back to the Trinity and some other things. But just so that you know it. And I don't think your average Jehovah's Witness even knows enough Hebrew to be dangerous. Okay? But what you see is the verb attached to the angel of the Lord and the verb attached here are the same root verb in the masculine singular. Third person. All right. Now, what is going on here? Both of those verbs are not Moses. You could say a verb connected to Moses is masculine, plural, singular. There's only one Moses, and he was a guy. And it's third person because of the way that's working. Okay, I'm talking about him. I'm not talking directly to him. First person, I, me. Second person, you. Third person, he. So I'm talking about him to the audience. Okay. Now, what you need to understand is that lines those two things up, because a different verb could have been used, but the fact that the same verb is used indicates or amplifies or further adds to the idea that these two are the same. Because there's only one other person who enters the picture between those two, and that's Moses. And Moses is not the angel of the Lord, and Moses is not the Lord. So we have two characters in the scene in those verses. The angel of the Lord and Moses, and the fact the same verb is used connects the angel of the Lord to the Lord. And I see no reason to think otherwise. So I see this as a perfectly okay to go ahead and see that the angel of the Lord is not some sort of onlooker where God snuck in when no one was looking, and the angel of the Lord is standing there. Now, some of the stuff that I did related to the angel of the Lord as an image is in a separate video called Is the Angel of the Lord a Hologram? And I will go back and put the URL for that. If you haven't seen it, it's a fun video. It's got a nice Star Wars picture there because some people will try to treat the angel of the Lord as a hologram. We know the angel of the Lord is a person. Why? Because he appeared. There's an element of volitionalness to the Hebrew verb there that he appeared. Okay? And that's why the verb isn't exactly the same for both. Because the Hebrew verb for appeared is a form of the word saw. So in this case, if I want to say saw, I use this form here. And what you should be able to see on here, because of Logos, is that writing down at the bottom. And it basically says that it's a cal, which is the simplest form of the verb. Okay? Now, the verb here, and someone might point this out, is called a niphiel. You don't need to remember all this Hebrew. Here's what you need to know. It's not the subjects that are different between the angel of the Lord and the Lord. It's the action is slightly different. There isn't a word for appeared. If I want to say appeared, I use the passive of saw. Being seen. So the way I would read this is, and the angel of the Lord is being seen to him. And that's what you do in the Hebrew. So if you want to say appeared, you use a form of the word see, and it's passive or reflexive. Reflexive is the subject is doing the action to the self. Okay? And that's what you do. And so the niphiel is used. It could be passive, reflexive, shades of meaning between the two, but it's the way you would say appear. Okay? Now, what makes me think that Moses is actually worshiping Jeff? Just because there's a theophany there, and even if you want to say the theophany is God, you haven't proved Moses worshiped, okay? So I'm going to verses 5 and 6. Is Moses really worshiping this thing? He said, do not draw near this place. Take off your sandals off your feet, for the place you stand is holy ground. Personal devotional thought, any place God is holy. Moreover, he said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's not the exciting part. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. So is Moses worshiping here, or is he just kind of, the angel of the Lord represents God. He's sort of his representative. And so if an ambassador comes in the room, I should give the same respect to the ambassador that I did to the government. He's a representative. This is a representation. And so Moses is just doing obeisance because this is the mouthpiece of God at the time. Well, let's talk about customs in the Near East. The taking off of shoes was considered an act of worship, lest you desecrate the ground. And this is historically true for the peoples of the Mideast. So I have a basic thing that Kyle and Delich point out, that this wasn't just even a Jewish thing. This was common. And so you have the Mesopotamians, the Arabs, the Samaritans. You even have some of this stuff, with Greek temples. The priests went barefoot. You see this in a mosque. If you go visit a mosque, you are expected to take your shoes off. And I'm not saying a mosque's holy ground. I'm saying they perceive it that way. Okay? And so Moses taking off his shoes, he's told to take off his shoes, for this is holy ground, indicates it's not just an angel here. It indicates obeisance or worship. And that's what Kyle and Delich is basically pointing to. Now, the reason that he hid his face is not because Moses was embarrassed. And it's not because this was an angel. Okay, because we have a causative in the Hebrew here. This is key. The cause of him turning his face away is he did not want to look at God. Which means if the angel of the Lord is the one there, and God did not sneak into the room, which we see, Moses is treating the angel of the Lord as deity by averting his face away in order to show the proper reverence. Okay? Now, how does Moses Maimonides get around this? The way he gets around all of this language. And so I went to the Guide for the Perplexed, pages 43 and 44 in this English translation of the Guide for the Perplexed. Now look at the way Moses Maimonides tries to get around this. You must know it is very injurious to begin with this branch of philosophy called metaphysics. Now, metaphysics is about the nature of reality. So if I talk about metaphysics, I'm talking about things like theology. I'm talking about the nature of the world. I'm, basically talking about that sort of epistemology is how we know what we know. So it's the branch of philosophy that deals with knowing. Okay. I could jokingly go to a party and say, I'm a metaphysician, and I think that would be a lot of fun. Because that's the branch of philosophy I have a lot of interest. What is real? What is the nature of reality? And so he says, well, if you start with metaphysics, not such a great idea. Well, the funny thing is he's steeped in Greek philosophy. At first, the sense of similes occurring in prophecies and interpreting metaphors, which are employed in historic accounts and which abound in the writings of the prophets. On the contrary, it was necessary to initiate the young and to instruct the less intelligent according to their comprehension. Ooh, okay. Who appear to be talented and have the capacity for a higher method of study. And that, based on the proof on the only true logical argument, should gradually advance towards perfection. Now, what he's saying is that Moses couldn't speak truthfully about this stuff. This is something you have to come in gradually. This gets very Gnostic. Okay? And so he says, this is not really, the language here, even though it might say this, is not really what it's saying. Because the language here doesn't say what it's supposed to say. Because, we have to progress from the silliness of taking this literally to taking it, allegorically. Okay. I compare such a person to an infant fed with wheaten bread and meat who will undoubtedly die. Okay, so if you started by taking this language literally, it would spiritually kill you. So God can't tell you what he really means to tell you because, you really couldn't take it. Now that makes the Bible kind of a thing where there's this hidden underlying meaning, and what it means, it doesn't really mean. And this is the way he gets around this. This is a very hard argument for me because I love language, and I think that God was perfectly capable of using it. And so this argument, this arcanization, which is called, where that was just the simple old meaning. It was never intended to be understood that way, is what Moses Maimonides is doing. And it drives me a little nuts, and we have to deal with it. Does it work in this case? Well, the problem becomes apparent. First of all, Moses infers very clearly in his articles that the Torah is without error. In fact, he says even if it appears to be errored or is errored, it's really just you didn't understand it. And in that place, I would agree with Moses Maimonides. If there's something in Scripture that appears to be an error, the answer is we haven't understood it. So I looked at these articles. Now, remember, we looked at Article 3. He says basically in Article 8, I believe that the law which we possess now is the same law given to Moses, our master. So he believes that what has been handed down effectively. In other words, errors did not occur in the transmission. Now, here's where he totally disagrees with Islam, which says that we have a corrupted Bible. Now, this is where the new covenant is a problem for Jewish people. I believe the law will not be changed and there will never be another law. The Bible doesn't teach that. In fact, Jeremiah teaches the opposite. Okay? But what I want you to see, he has a pretty high view of the law. Okay? So he might try to object to the language used simply could not be understood. So the historic incidents are misrecorded only because they are in human language. See, in God having to use our language, error is automatically introduced. He could not speak to us in any human language in a way that conveyed accurately what he wanted to say. Okay, that's what he's essentially arguing. So it's not as though the Torah is deliberately wrong about this incident. It's not deliberately wrong. It's simply that God couldn't convey what really happened anyway. So where does that bring us? Okay. Well, here's the crux of the problem, and there's a truism here. I have a refrigerator magnet saying, okay, the Torah was not only written in the language of men. Whoops. Don't go there. In the language of men, but was written to men to convey truth through language. Now, men also includes gals, okay? It's generic. We will say, you can translate it. The Torah was the 5 books of Moses were not only written in the language of people, but it was written to people. So it was not only written in their language, it was written to them as an audience using language to convey truth. In other words, God's purpose in giving this was to convey truth through language. That's what God is wanting to do. If I just say that the Torah is written in the language of people, so it cannot accurately convey what God wants to convey, I'm ignoring the fact that God wrote it to people to convey truth through language. In other words, he never wrote it so that it could not convey what he wanted it to convey. To state that this is an unintelligible document, except for the spiritually enlightened, is to indicate that God never intended all of Israel to have the Torah. Because why would you give something to somebody and intend for them to have it if they can't have it by virtue of the way you gave it to them? So I leave you money, but I put it in a will in such a way that you can never have it. That would indicate that the Torah was never a fit instrument for Israel to begin with, but it was only fit for the elite. If so, God should have just given it to the elite. Hey, Moses Maimonides, if you're really going to, if somebody, you're going to really argue Moses Maimonides' point, I have a real simple solution. Don't give it to Israel in general. They're not going to understand it. Give it to the elite and let the elite teach Israel. Come on. If translation needs to be done, give it to the people to translate it. But the prophets and Torah don't even allow this claim to stand. This is so cool. Even English translations of the Hebrew scriptures undermine Moses' point. This is Deuteronomy 30:14. You ever wondered what this verse means? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. Now, what is this verse about? Well, actually, Dr. Michael Brown quotes the NJPV, which is not always the nicest translation about, trying to convey things. Sometimes it's slanted a little. But this is great. This is the way this verse is translated. Surely this instruction, which is what the word Torah means, which I enjoin upon you this day, is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond your reach. That's the way it's translating near you, not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond your reach. And it is continuing to translate this. It is not in the heavens. Now, that's the rest of the verse. It is not in heaven that you have to go get it. That you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us and impart it to us and translate it for us, okay, that we may observe it. Neither is it beyond the sea. Now, by the way, this gets translated in the New Testament. Neither is it beyond the sea to get it and impart it to us. So no one has to go get it and impart it to us that we may observe it. No, this thing is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart to observe it. This is a translation of the Hebrew scriptures that says the Torah is not too baffling. So Maimonides, apparently it isn't that baffling. It isn't that impossible to understand. And there is no problem then with viewing these historic incidents as actual incidents. Not only that, but here's a Hebrew scholar who says it is not beyond your understanding that you should have needs of prophets to explain the way of repentance. Really? Nor is it far away that you should have the need of wise men of the generation. Now, that's exactly what Moses Maimonides is claiming, is that the sages, the Talmud, and then a deeper understanding make it available because people couldn't comprehend it otherwise, because God is writing in the language of men, and it cannot effectively convey spiritual truth at all. But yet, this is not what's being said here. It is not in heaven. There's no aspect of repentance which desires amplification, the telling of a prophet. Neither is it in the sea. There's no need for wise men who are far away to expound it to you in a manner that is possible for you to do in exile. It is not difficult for you to perform, as sometimes occurs with a commandment that needs interpretation of wise men. This guy is literally saying the opposite of what Maimonides is saying. But beyond that, the prophets indicate, now this is the way I'm taking this, remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded for him for all Israel, with statutes and judgment. Okay, now what is being pointed out here by Kyle and Delitzsch is that this is pointing to God being the author of the law, not Moses. Okay? And it is for all Israel. But the word for there can be rendered upon or to. So it is upon Israel, it is to Israel, can be the way of understanding this. The use indicates the prophet expected Israel to obey the law because they could understand it. Hey, look, I can't get mad at people for not obeying that which they cannot comprehend. And so it seems like Moses Maimonides wants to hold a high view of the Torah, but then on the other hand, he wants to get away from clear historic incidents by saying that they couldn't be conveyed accurately anyway because they're in human language. And God can't make use of human language. Now, there are a host of other problems with this because we're image bearers, and so it is logical to assume that God can convey to image bearers that which he wants to convey, us carrying his image. So I would say if you say that God can't convey to image bearers, then God can't convey to much of anything else. And so why bother? Okay, so where does this leave us? Well, the language in these passages, being the commissioning of Moses, indicates that Moses clearly worshipped a theophany. I mean, the language lines up with the verbs for the Lord and the angel of the Lord being the same basic root verb in the same gender, the same number, and the same person, with only a difference in the stem. I mean, in the stem, the binyan, the way it's expressed, because of a difference in the action, not the subject. There is no evidence that God enters the room separate from the angel of the Lord. Now, that's an argument from silence, but given the grammar, given the importance of the passage, and given that if God didn't want theophanies worshipped, that would be the place to put it in, I think we have grounds to infer that that would be a significant silence. It would be an important silence to the understanding of the authorial intent of the passage. Okay? If the silence that's there is a silence that indicates something vital to the authorial intent of the passage, we really can't not look at it. Okay? If you want to use the excuse that the appearance of worship is basically due to an inability of the Torah to properly convey historic events, well, that's refuted by a clear statement in Torah. Deuteronomy is the repeating of the law, and Moses says when he's repeating the law that is perfectly understandable. And by the way, Moses is being moved by God when the law is being repeated in these last sermons to tell Israel before they go into the land that his law is understandable. The clear worship of a theophany means either the Torah misrepresents a historic event, and that's really key, because if it misrepresents one historic event, maybe it misrepresents every historic event. I mean, that's a perfectly logical position to be at, or God allows for a form of idolatry. The Maimonidean view that the Torah is the same Torah means that it cannot be a different Torah, and because there won't be another Torah, which I disagree with. I view the law of Christ as the Torah of Messiah, and did so in my dissertation, that you can look at the law of Christ and the New Testament in terms of being a new covenant, in terms of being a new Torah. Where there's a new covenant, there is new Torah. But yeah, and I went about proving that this is very likely. But the bottom line is, if you're going to argue it's the same Torah and it will never need amendment, then you're arguing that, you have a problem here. Why does it need amendment if it's wrong? If human language is inadequate and human language has changed, then you could reformulate the Torah into more accurate language, couldn't you? And it impinges on his formula if God deliberately misrepresented these incidents. See, they have to be historic, because you cannot separate language from the event. The language describes the event. And if the language misdescribes the event, then the event itself is not being conveyed properly. In other words, language and the event go together. They're connected. They're connected historically, and they're connected linguistically. The only way to describe an event is through language. And so God then would be using language deliberately in a way that misrepresents a historic event. Well, that's pretty horrible for the Torah. If the event is being accurately conveyed, then how can you say God can't take a form? Because he obviously did. Because that angel of the Lord being worshipped would have to be God if there's no idolatry being created. Because God getting worship, having an image or representation get worshipped would be idolatry. It would be problematic on a lot of levels. Now, this isn't perfect, and again, I continue to refine these cases, but I think we have a really good case here. Now, let's go back, because we've got some great people. As far as weather, just to let you know, there's been shockingly cooler weather. We had rain and 89 degrees, down from 117. So I'm excited. That was kind of nice. However, Elizabeth wants to let me know that it's winter there, and I would actually have to wear like winter clothes, which is because they're on the opposite side of things. So we'll be watching that weather in the winter here and see what we've got. Our winter is incredibly cold. That's just some Texas weather. Now, there was a question that Lindsay brought up, a kind of an interesting kind of slant on this whole thing. Someone might try to pull this, I think. They might say that you have an incident with the snake, and while she doesn't think it's idolatry, they might try to claim it's idolatry. Okay, and actually the Jewish people, Israel, did keep it around, and it sort of became an idol, but it wasn't intended to become an idol. And doesn't that mean that someone could claim that essentially God did kind of idolatry? No, because idolatry has to do with assigning the reverence due to deity to an object. Okay. I can really, really like my new Versa Fitbit, and I'm enjoying it to no end. And I can really enjoy it and consider it a great gift from God. And it really has been a blessing, but that would not be idolatry. Now, if I gave it the place in my life where it became God and I worshiped it, that would then be idolatry. It's the same reason why I don't personally have a problem with having a pine tree in my house during Christmas. Because I'm not treating that pine tree as deity. I'm treating it as something that smells nice and makes a central location in the house where we can stick things where they'll be safe until we can share gifts and enjoy each other's company. So if someone were to try and use that excuse, I would say no. The difference is these theophanies are being given, and there are more of them. They're being given the reverence that is due deity, as opposed to the snake, which you looked upon and lived because you were obeying a divine command. And you were obeying the divine command by exercising faith. So the faith, your obedience was an exercise of faith, because how does a bronze statue save you from a snake bite? Okay, we have rattlesnakes here in Arizona, and I would never stare at a statue after I was bit by a rattlesnake. Ooh, I was bit by a rattlesnake. I'm going to stare at the statue. They had to believe God would indeed go ahead and save them from the snakes. And so they were exercising faith and obeying a command, but they were not giving worship or obeisance. Okay? And so that's why I would consider that different. And Maimonides wouldn't even deal with that. He'd say the snake was accurately representing something else, because God did not convey the event accurately. By the way, then, why celebrate Passover as the Exodus? It's just an improperly conveyed historic event that may mean a dozen other things. So I think there's a real problem with trying to separate the validity of the language from the validity of the event. Because if one is invalid, the other is questionable. And you cannot separate language from the event, because it's connected historically in that it's conveying history, and linguistically in that it is describing with language the event in question. So, and so I think that this undermines Moses's point, because I can say theophanies were worshipped, and I think this is a really interesting argument. If I am against idolatry and I believe God's against idolatry and these theophanies are worshipped, then I have to allow God to take form. Otherwise, I'm going back on believing that God didn't really dislike idolatry. He just disliked our idolatry and wanted to substitute his own. And I think it's a really interesting point to make to a Jewish person. You'd have to hone it down. You'd have to make it more succinct. You might want to ask a question like, well, it looks like Moses worships the angel of the Lord. It looks like Jacob worships the angel of the Lord. If the angel of the Lord is not God, then aren't they committing a sin by doing so? I have not tried this with Muslims, by the way. But I think the same argument could be adapted for a Muslim audience in a real sense. Any other comments there? You did notice Mr. Phil Fox's thing up there. Slam put Deuteronomy 18:5. I don't think that's in reference to the angel of the Lord. I think that's in reference to Moses and his place. But see, Hebrews says that the son of the household is greater than the builder of the household. And in that way, Messiah is greater than Moses. And it's just making a rabbinical argument, essentially. So, okay, well, tomorrow we're going to look at the hypostatic union, what it means for Jesus to be a man, and how Gethsemane may have presented his greatest spiritual battle. And maybe that's where the battle really was for him in the most intense way. So you're free to tune in tomorrow to get back to Matthew through Jewish eyes. And Slam's pointing out they like to say our book's corrupted and try to point out that Muhammad was prophesied in our book. Yes, but he was not a prophet like Moses, and I can give you some real good reasons why. Moses ministered to the Jewish people. Muhammad never did. Moses did miracles. Muhammad says the only miracle he's got is the Quran, and I've looked at it. This is a good point because they believe that worshiping anything other than God would be shirk. And so rather than say Moses committed shirk, they'll say the book's corrupted. But the problem is the book isn't corrupted. This seems to indicate, hypostatic union. So that may have come out sounding wrong. Let's go back to Ben. This is a real important point because this could be used against them. Moses seemed to worship a theophany. We have reasons to believe the text isn't corrupted. We can go into, I'm not going to go into those right now. Therefore, we have a problem. We have God taking form. And I have used the theophanies with Muslims. I was asked about whether, it would be improper for God to become a man. And I said, so it's proper to be God to become an angel or a bush, but it's improper for him to become a man. Why is it easier for him to become a bush or an angel than it is for him to become a man? So, hypostatic, has to do with the relationship between Jesus's divine and human nature, but it will be defined tomorrow again because this is a very unique thing, and Gethsemane is a very unique thing understood in terms of Jesus dealing with Gethsemane with those two natures. So, yes, and you can undercut that. I was thinking of other reasons, but two of them is that Moses did miracles. Muhammad didn't really do any. And then the other is that Muhammad never ministered to Israel and Moses ministered exclusively to Israel. So that's basically where we're at. Well, guys, I love having you all here. Ben, it was good to shout out to Ben West. Just because I don't think I've seen you for a while. Shout out to Phil Fox because I know he's busy with his own broadcast. Good to have you here, John Williams. Chris, it is always a pleasure. And of course, I love that we go international with our sister from down under. And who knows, I may actually end up someday getting to the end of that cooking show and seeing which couple wins. So I'm going to put these up here. There you go. And there was another one here, but I can't find it. Oh, shout out to Built for Speed. Excellent. Glad he was here. And someone threw up another URL, but I can't seem to find it. I like that, like sawing off a branch that one is sitting on. So that's from, yep, you can crush yourself. So, well, I'm going to Erev Tov. I don't usually grab anything before the broadcast, and I have been drinking water because at 107 degrees, water is a necessity. It's not 107 in the house. We have AC everywhere here, but let's just face it, even AC drives you out. So I'm going to drink about a gallon of water. Some thank yous from folks. I really appreciate it. Jack Ray and others. And I'll see many of you tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and Erev Tov and check in with the family. Bye, all.